CT Muga, good morning, CT.
Good morning, Eric.
How are you doing?
I am doing well. And how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
That is good.
Yep. Njeri, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing? You good?
Good. No complaints.
Ndu Okoh.
Good morning. Oh no. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I was waiting for that. You know?
Oh, really?
Yes. So a lot has happened since the time we were here. We've seen it in politics. We've seen it in matters of development. Let's take a look at many of them, a quick one. And the Standard. What's in the headline in the Standard? Njeri.
Right at the top of the page, which is what I'm interested in, PS accuses Ruto of jumping the gun in a 5 billion shilling irrigation project. So it's a delayed payment. Water and Sanitation's Joseph Irungu tells MPs that he was in the dark over the launch of the Lower Nzoia irrigation project by the DP in June, when land compensation had not been finalized.
So what happened? So the DP went and launched a project, and the other, the PS or the ministry was not even aware that this project was happening. Okay, and it's a 5.3 billion shillings project.
Yes, only 5.3.
Only 5.3. So it's not much, right?
No.
So the project has basically not started, but it has been launched. What was it? Groundbreaking? What do you call it? Groundbreaking? What do you call it? They were trying to launch it. What do you think was happening in this case? It's a big one.
Remember, there is a fundamental difference here. Mr. Irungu is a bureaucrat, okay? He's a government functionary. The DP is a politician. And if you are in a region and you are the deputy president and you are a politician, how else do you communicate to the electorate in that region? You communicate that you have brought development. Yes. And if there's a project that you know of, even if it's supposed to take off 10 years from that point in time, but it's in the pipeline, it's planned, it has been documented, you take the opportunity and speak about it. That was a simple political move, nothing complicated.
So the ministry was not ready. So basically...
Let me ask the question, Eric. Think about it. Look at, listen, and just pause for a second and consider the way politicians speak. You know, a lot of their speech is always in the future. Everything they talk about is in the future. It's present. If they talk about present, we have brought development. Okay?
Yep.
Or they will say, we are completing. Something that is already going on, they will speak of in the present. But everything else, usually, it's in the future. Yes, exactly. We've planned this, we're going to give it to you. It's more alluring when it's in the future.
You have something to look forward to.
Yes.
I guess.
But as Eric asks, other than the proclamation that he's launched the project, what did he actually do? Because if he doesn't have the sort of backing of the different ministries or the different agencies that are involved, did he bring his own workers to start this project? Did he just stand there and say, I have launched?
In fact, it
was just an utterance?
No, Mr. Joseph Irungu has just jumped in feet first. You see, if this thing doesn't take off, a politician will now blame the bureaucrat. This is something we had planned for, but as you can see, there are people who are against development, and you can see the position that they have taken. And this is something that I know, because I worked hard to ensure I bring it for you.
But what is the definition of launch? That's what I'm trying to get to. Because they're saying he launched the project, but he hadn't been in touch
inaugurate.
So when you open...
It's inaugurate at the end. You know, there's groundbreaking, which is basically saying, so this is where the project is going to take place. And what we are doing now is we are like, blessing the commencement of the project. And then there's launching, and that's at the completion, like what we expect to see at in Lamu, or what we expect
when you've
to see
completed it, you now launch it. So
yes.
Let me take you back to what I said.
Politician, future.
Yes.
Okay. No.
All right. Outrage as serial killer strikes again, which is on the front page of the Daily Nation. Mustafa Idi had told everyone who cared to listen about his dark past as a serial killer, but they had all dismissed it as a bad joke until the mutilated body of his former girlfriend, Emma Wanyota, was found in a Napier grass farm, and police confirmed this carpenter was indeed a prime suspect in the murder. A few years ago, he had actually said that, he will strike and he will strike again. I don't know if serial killer is the
I was going to
description
say,
give
he killed his
him.
girlfriend.
Yeah, so I don't. Serial killer means someone who has killed several times in a similar pattern.
Or is that what you're saying? That last time when he spoke, he had said, "I have killed,"
Or that I will kill. Self-confessed serial killer strikes again. He had said previously he has taken the life of yet another woman in a macabre accident that shocked residents of Moisbridge town in Uasin Gishu County. In what turns out to have been a real threat but was dismissed as a bad joke, Mustafa Idi, a carpenter in Kitale, had often bragged to whoever gave him attention that he had killed 2 women before, according to residents, and he said that he was going to strike again, apparently. And so here we are with the mutilated body of his girlfriend having been found, and all fingers are pointing to him.
So he's been arrested. A serial killer is typically somebody who murders 3 or more people. So, yeah, he falls into the definition of a serial killer if it's 3.
Yeah.
And they seem to like to leave little clues or to be noticed for it.
Or have a pattern, a way of this kind of killing.
Yeah, and he wants to be acknowledged for it somehow.
You're saying his attention-seeking behavior.
Well, it is.
And when nobody notices, that's why he was going around telling people, I've actually
Come
done
on,
it.
you
Yes.
guys, haven't you seen? Haven't
I've
you
done
noticed?
this. So there's outrage. I don't
Well,
know
at
if
least
the
he's
outrage is
behind
just
the bars.
outrage or fear.
Well, there's further outrage over the slow recovery of the ferry victims.
Now, that's what I want us to talk about. And how it happened, why it happened, who should be culpable, because these incidents are, far too many, and this notion that it was an act of God.
Act of God.
Yes.
That was not an act of God.
Well, we've heard people say that, and that seems to be our sort of reaction
It's
to a lot of
fatalism.
things.
It's fatalism, which often rears its head when people find themselves in a constant state of helplessness. Yes, so you sort of like resign and consign yourself to the fate and let it be.
Okay. But in this case, before we look at the recovery, which of course itself was botched up, and we've had a lot of outrage, especially on social media, with people talking about the fact that the Navy is actually planning on doing this march and so on. Excuse me. And they themselves couldn't get themselves together to find the bodies of those involved. But with regards to the accident and how it happened, so you had a car roll off the front of one of the ferries, because at the front, I think it's just a rope, and then there's a ramp which is supposed to be pulled up.
Yes.
But it, of course, the angle or the tangent.
From what I...
Did this roll off the front or the back?
Both ramps go down. Remember, you can exit and you can enter the ferry from either side, right? So the ramp goes down when people want to disembark. When they want to get on, it also does the same thing. Now, once the ferry has actually had its load of passengers and vehicles, it goes up. So the issue of a car rolling off, unless the car was actually on the ramp and the ramp wasn't elevated, that is one of the reasons why the thing could slide. As the rope, or if the ramp wasn't working, okay, if the ramp wasn't working, then it stayed permanently down. Then it would be easy. But even then, let me say, that ramp, if you look at it, it is something like around probably 2 meters. Okay?
Yeah.
It takes time for somebody to roll off. So if you are not stationed at the ramp, it's very, very difficult. So chances are this car was actually on the ramp, which is symptomatic of the overloading that is often seen at the ferry. People actually perch on the ramp itself.
And in many African countries, you've seen that in Tanzania, Uganda, you've seen ferries actually go down for that very reason.
Yes.
So,
Remember Mtongwe ferry had a capacity for 300. And when it went down, it had 400 passengers.
Right.
It was completely overloaded.
Okay, so in this case, who would be responsible? Is it the guard
Kenya Ferry
at
Services.
Kenya Ferry Services?
Don't even take it far. Kenya Ferry Services.
And the ministry that manages that would be the
Transport Ministry.
Transport Ministry.
So if you think about the agencies that are actually around that channel, the Kenya Ferry Services there, the Kenya Ports Authority is there, we've got the Navy that's nearby, and we're talking about a family actually going to hire private divers at 250,000 shillings to try and retrieve.
If you want to
Because
understand
there's no emergency rescue with any of
if
these
you want to
agencies.
understand how bizarre it is, the Navy has a capacity for salvaging such a damage at around 30 meters. Anything, yes, it is in the papers. Anything that goes beyond 30 meters, they don't have the capacity.
can't.
Navy.
What's
Kenya
even more bizarre
Navy.
is last year the president inaugurated The Coast Guard.
Not only inaugurated it,
Launched.
we actually put they're in law. They exist.
They actually exist now in
In law, yes.
The Kenya Coast Guard.
Yes.
What would the Coast Guard be doing if not this kind of thing?
Actually, this is what the Coast Guard would be doing.
I hear the husband of the lady that was involved, the lady and the daughter, he's been forced to hire divers at a cost of 250,000 shillings to try and recover the bodies. So something clearly that the government should be doing.
And where is the governor of Mombasa County? Have you heard anything that he has said?
Okay,
I've heard anything that has come from him.
You would assume every time I hear people criticizing the governor of Nairobi, he actually offered his Sonko rescue team, because he has divers as part of his team. He offered that. He did. Yesterday. He said, no,
Go.
and help sort this thing out. So if you're asking about the governor of Mombasa, your guess is as good as mine.
I think the rot at the ferry services runs a lot deeper than we realize.
If you think
it's a matter of time before we have something more catastrophic.
You should ask about the state of the ferries themselves. You would not cross that channel in any of those ferries if you understood. How many times do you hear of the ferry sort of like being stranded middle, and
right,
just
in the
sort
middle
of like
of the
going
channel?
around in circles?
Yeah.
Not once, not twice.
I use that ferry quite a bit, actually. Scary.
It is very scary. It's very, very scary. One of the things that, remember, we talked about a while back, we're looking at, there's this lady who had been appointed to be our ambassador. Was it to Korea?
South Korea,
South
yes.
Korea.
Yes, and the AMPs kicked a fuss and then some. Well, the gentleman by Omtata claims that 10 MPs hold foreign citizenship. Yep, he says 2 senators and 8 MPs actually have foreign citizenship.
This would be
citizen.
duality, right?
Yes, the very thing. The very thing that
They have refused.
Yep.
So Umtata has actually written to the EACC and said, look, let's talk about the ethics and integrity of this particular state officers.
Yes.
Because MPs are state officers. And whether they just please investigate whether these people actually hold a dual citizenship. And he listed the names.
He did.
And he said, this current serving MPs, this current serving senators, and former MPs, so and so, so and so, so and so. So please investigate and let us know what you find.
Remember, some times back again, there was this ruling by the courts that more or less prohibited our investigative agencies from simply going about their business without this long, lengthy court processes. Well, they've gotten a breather. Justice Mumbi Ngugi has given them that breather.
What did she say?
What did she say?
You can go ahead and do what you're doing before.
Carry on, as it
Please carry on. Yes. Okay.
Okay, well, Kenya inches closer to giving long-awaited GMO cotton a green light. And Kenya is closing in on commercializing BT cotton, high-yielding, genetically modified cotton varieties resistant to the notorious bollworm pests. They've undergone 2 successful seasons of national trials, and they've determined that these varieties are suitable for certain ecological zones. The outcome has been impressive, according to biotech researchers. Dr. Charles Waturu, who is the principal researcher on this project at the Kenya Agricultural Livestock Research Organization, KALRO, said that the new crop can yield more than twice the conventional hybrid counterpart. Of course, I mean, this is one industry that has been struggling over time, and now they found that we can actually get a way to get, high yield cotton.
But this is GMO.
This is GMO, yes. And of course, the GMO debate has been quite vibrant in terms of should we be going the GMO way, or should we just stick to our natural agricultural processes. But if there's something that can high yield towards the textile industry, perhaps it's something that wants to be looked at as an option for good.
A little bit of politics. Raila to lead the party MPs into the Kibra campaigns as the poll nears. ODM lawmakers agreed to each contribute 50,000 shillings to help finance Imran Okoth's bid for the seat. So you still need money no matter how popular you are. Same way Coca-Cola still needs to advertise, I guess.
And then now, in fact, still staying on the Kibra issue. So we saw some pictures that circulated. In fact, it's on the front page of the Star this morning. Raila Odinga with the Malindi MP Aisha Jumwa and the Kibra ODM candidate Imran Okoth after a PG meeting for ODM in Parliament, where it said that Aisha had not attended, but she ended up in a photo op with the former Prime Minister and the candidate.
Voila.
So the ODM brigade actually went on all out and said, yeah, Aisha is back. Who said Aisha has left? Aisha is actually, she's here with us. She's back to ODM. Later, we see the same Aisha Jumwa actually being in Kibra on the same day with the Deputy President campaigning for the Jubilee candidate. And she says, gone where? I haven't left.
What do you make of this? What is there to make of it? This lady is a politician. Is a politician.
She gets around a bit, though.
Yes, she does. And please bear in mind, my friend, you will serve the master who butters your bread. Okay? She may have been elected on an ODM ticket, but if there are suitors who come along with better goodies than ODM, why should she not pander to them?
And then move on back to ODM.
And then come back to ODM later.
When it suits her, yes.
Why not? Absolutely.
This is politics. Yes, it's not as though she's committing a cardinal crime. She's a sin. She's just being a politician.
And just from historical experience, you didn't expect that she was going to do something different. I mean, as with the case with very many politicians, say one thing.
The only thing she needs to be careful about is that if the electorate in her backyard deem that she has betrayed the party, then this is her last time in Parliament.
Unfortunately.
She will not see Parliament again.
Well, why are they fighting over this particular MP so much? How valuable is she?
She's vocal, very vocal. And in our politics, you need vocal people.
I think also it was one of the few channels through which Ruto could penetrate the coast. He didn't have very many people there because it's predominantly or primarily ODM. And she is quite vocal and attracts a lot of attention. She's got a lot of presence as well, so great for media as well, and the dancing and some of her comments. And she must have a constituency which we feel she controls to a certain extent. I don't know about whether it's the party that's put her there or whether she's brought the party there, CD. It's the party that's put her there. So maybe she can shift their attitudes.
It's the same thing with many leaders, the leadership in Coast. I mean, the exception you would say would be the governor of Kwale. But then if you look at the array of his MCAs, they are ODM. So this is one of the few cases where it is the man. He, Mvuria, is someone.
So Aisha is more the party, more about the party than herself. Right. So well, maybe she's making a name for herself now.
She has seen the opportunity
beyond the party.
Yes, and one of the things that she's doing, she's ensured that there's a lot of visibility around her. Yes.
So there's an upcoming civic by-election in Malindi, which is what they're saying that it's also going to be testing whether she can actually deliver anything. So she'll be campaigning for a Jubilee candidate apparently, and of course, ODM has a candidate in the same civic by-election.
Well, one wishes her luck. One really wishes her luck.
See how it goes.
You know how these things go. If you're working to become an MP in a predominantly, perhaps to understand it, let me discuss it Central Kenya, all right? And you have somebody who perhaps is even popular, but he's on an ODM ticket, and he is vying against somebody in Jubilee. Even if you're popular and you're on an ODM ticket in Central, what are your chances of actually being elected?
Slim to none, probably.
Yes.
So we've been looking at what's been covered in the headlines. Remember, you can download the standard e-paper app on the Google Play Store or Apple App Store. And for just a single fee, you can subscribe and get access to all the publications by the Standard Group. And that's the Standard newspaper, you've got the Nairobian, you've got the Mount Kenya Star, and all the others. This is the Standard e-paper. You can download it on Google Play Store or Apple App Store. It's 20 minutes past 6 o'clock. This is the Situation Room.
But your intelligent talk
It's 20 minutes after 6 o'clock. Good morning. This is the Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. Live streaming on Facebook, www.spicefm.co.ke. That's our website. Our Facebook account is SpiceFMKE. Our YouTube page as well is SpiceFMKE. And Twitter, SpiceFMKE. Our hashtag Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. 94.4 in Nairobi, 87.9 in Mombasa, 102.5 in Kisumu, 96.0 in Nakuru, 96.7 Eldoret, 90.9 Nyeri, 97.6 Malindi. In the room we have Njeri Thorne. I'm Eric Latiff. We've got Okoh and CT Muga, who's got something that we want to talk about. So, are we going to borrow more or are we going to borrow less?
We are going to continue borrowing. So long as people are willing to lend us, we will borrow. But that really isn't earth-shaking or earth-moving. Governments the world over, it doesn't matter which government, borrow. They borrow. The discussion surrounding borrowing, the economic value of it, the understanding of it, that's a discussion that people who understand this subject better than I can discuss. That's not what I'm looking at. You see, I'm looking at government borrowing from this perspective. From the simple perspective that when you want to borrow, whether it is from a bank or from from a SACCO, you must have collateral. In a SACCO, you have shares. You have been paying in a certain amount of money and you borrow against it, say 3 times, but then you have sureties. The sureties are other members and they pledge a certain amount of their shares to sort of support your borrowing. Unless, of course, you're borrowing the equivalent of just what you have. When you go to a bank, it's similar. When governments do that, it's also similar. And to understand this, some very interesting emerging economy who had borrowed more than they could pay had to surrender an asset to the Chinese. They surrendered a port. So it explained that that was collateral. Now, the question we want to ask is, what does our government give as collateral when they borrow? Because we are now told they want to borrow another 6 trillion. Is it 9 trillion? They want to
raise the
but the trillion, how many zeros does trillion have? 12?
12.
Yes.
They want to raise the debt limit, the ceiling, to 9.1 trillion.
Yes. The debt, again, from what I understand, is not really even the issue. No. Debt becomes an issue when you compare it to what the country produces. Okay, called the GDP, as they call it, gross domestic product. And it's usually a percentage of that. Ours currently, I'm told, our borrowing is at 54% of what we produce. Now, to understand it also, I'm told you need to look at what other countries borrow. And in those terms, we are not doing badly. But what concerns me is, apart from just the question of what is it the government uses, there is something that happened not very long ago. We were taken through a whole exercise, something called Huduma number. And all our details were collected. It reminded me of the time when you open a bank account, the details that they get, where you live. It means when you can't pay, they want to know where they can come and collect your furniture. When the government goes to borrow, I am certain all the details we have, where we work, it's easy to work out how much we earn. So it's easy to work out how much tax you can pay. I believe one wouldn't be wrong if one asked the question, do these details form part of the collateral that our government gives to these people who give them money? And if so, they're not just mortgaging the country, they're mortgaging their people.
So you're saying that we are the collateral?
We are the collateral. Everything points to it. Everything points to it. Ask yourself a simple question. Again, I asked of people who understand. I said, the details that they require from this Huduma number. It looks to me that these are details the government already has. Well, I didn't have to ask. Last week it was clear in the papers. The government said, yes, they did have the information, but it was scattered. So I said, ask someone who is in the know, someone who understands IT. So I asked him, so what do you do in such a case? He said, you write a program. I asked him to explain. He said, look, if you have information everywhere, you have a program. That program will be able to amalgam all that information and put it in one place so that it isn't difficult to actually get all the information. So from this discussion, it was clear that the government didn't have to take us through that Huduma number route. They didn't. They already had the information. But then one could argue there are people whose details had not been captured. So they need to capture the details again. And then again, not long after that, we had the census. Our details are constantly being taken. Census, one understands perfectly. But you could have done a census with the Huduma number as well. These things that the government has been doing may have very good reasons behind it. But if you look at their track record and the things they do, even the borrowing in itself is not a problem, because borrowing is supposed to be for economic development. And if you spurt and if you increase economic activity, then it means you're able to pay. But if you have situations where the money that is borrowed rarely can you explain where it went, then you'll have a situation where you have a debt you cannot service. And when I say that the people are being mortgaged, I mean it, because it appears that way. It would appear that we are the ones who are offering the guarantee that the government needs to be able to borrow and to continue borrowing and to continue borrowing.
We as data, we as individuals, how elaborate on that a little bit?
Data cannot exist in the absence of people.
So when you say we are the collateral, please expound on that. Are they going to take us as slaves if they don't pay back this loan? Or is it our data and information that they're buying?
The data and information is adequate collateral in that. Let me give the simple example. Mm-hmm. One of the things they ask you is what you do, where you work, what level of education. Mm-hmm. That one was even in the census. Mm. That information, it's not difficult to extrapolate what someone earns. Mm-hmm. And if you consider the workforce that we have in this country, then it isn't difficult to figure how much we can earn now and how much we can continue earning. Mm-hmm. And all you need to do is explain how much you plan to increase your taxes. You can easily extrapolate how much the government can make just from that. Mm. This isn't difficult arithmetic. That's what I mean by data.
In the absence of this data, what else would they give as collateral? Because like you said,
government, they would give assets. For instance, there was this berth that we sold at Heathrow. A very valuable asset, extremely valuable. Mm. We have a port. You could say you're privatizing it, but you've only given it away. We have more than one port. We have land. The government owns assets. The government has assets.
When we go through the process of borrowing, when we go through the process of saying, okay, we want to raise the debt ceiling to X amount, I'm assuming that there would be a plan, or there would be, plans for how we are going to pay this money back. And as much as it's made public, it would be interesting to know whether the payback method is also made public for people to know where this money is going to be paid from. Obviously, taxes comes into play, and that's kind of like a given because, money that they make from taxes will be used as a payback method. But is it then made public later in terms of, where we're going to get the money from? Because if we're looking, we don't have it. That's why we are borrowing in the first place.
Yep.
To be able to, expend it on certain projects, whatever they say it's going to be used for. So in order for us to pay back, is that information made public where it is going to come from?
Well, usually we borrow, and most countries will have to borrow for infrastructure development and development in general. We can't borrow for recurrent expenditure. So we can't borrow to pay staff or to pay MCAs and so on. But the rate at which we've borrowed, of course, has increased significantly. We are seeing projects coming up, but by the time these projects crystallize and actually start making money whereby we can use the money coming from there to pay back these loans, there might be a little bit of a lag in between, and we might find ourselves in the red in terms of the accounting books. I think that there is a problem. At the moment, I think we've borrowed more than half our country's value.
We actually are in the red. Mm. But part of the problem is that it was in the papers when we issued the second bond in 2018 that some of this money we're actually borrowing so that we can pay debts. This was what was worrying. Mm. Yes. Because that now you enter. That ratio, the 54% public debt, that actually isn't even worrisome. Not necessarily. What is worrisome is that you're not generating enough revenue to be able to pay what you owe. That's what's worrying.
Which you'd find economists explain away by the fact that the money that is being borrowed is being used for mega infrastructure projects, which take long to materialize
in this country,
and start.
Like which one?
Things like LAPSET, the dams that we were looking at. We've got to isolate this from the discussion of the thievery within it. We're just looking at sort of the theory behind it. Then we can look at why we won't be able to pay it back because of the corruption and so on. But in terms of theoretically, we're actually in a good position to pay it back. It just might take longer because of the sort of projects that we're going to then rely on to pay these loans back. It's going to stimulate economic activity. It will increase the GDP. Money will be made from it. And this is what is going to be paying the loans back. That is, in theory or in paper, how this borrowing works for infrastructure development.
So City Muga is raising this issue this morning, and he says that, well, maybe the Huduma number and all the other data that the government has been collecting is actually being used as collateral in borrowing of how much we're borrowing countrywide. It's 29 minutes to 7 o'clock. This is a Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation.
96.0 Spice.
All right, nothing major happening on the roads, but it's going to happen in about half an hour. Stand by, because Jogo Road right now is flowing smoothly. Wayaki Way is also very clear this morning, but definitely we'll see a different situation in about half an hour, coming off Thika Road and also coming off Ngong Road. The show opens today. President Uhuru Kenyatta is going to make his way to open the show today, so be ready for massive traffic today. I'm sounding out the alarms right now. In half an hour, I'll let you know more of what's going on the roads. But for now, if you see, look for an alternative route now, because you need one. Trust me. 0719-012-600.
You are in the Situation Room on Spice FM, Kenya's biggest conversation, 97.6 in Malindi, in Nyeri 90.9, in Eldoret 96.7, Nakuru 96.0, 102.5, Kisumu 87.9 in Mombasa. As always, we live stream on Facebook. That's Facebook is Spice FM KE on Facebook, on Twitter Spice FM KE, and our hashtag is Situation Room, and also on our website www.spicefm.co.ke. In the room, my name is Eric Latiff. We've got Okoh, Njeri Thorne, CT Muga, who's this morning is talking about borrowing habits, so to speak. And then you also bring a new twist.
Yes, it isn't actually a twist. It's something that I want us to look at, because if you look at the amount we have borrowed, and if you look at just the leap in our borrowing, not even in the last 50 years, just in the last 5 years, not 10, 5 years, they ought to be a commensurate rate of development, commensurate to the borrowing. And that isn't the case. We keep being told that there is economic growth. Now, whenever there is economic growth, there are signs. One of the signs is this. You will find, for instance, that our currency gets stronger. for purposes of trade, it is actually not in our interest for our currency to be strong. It actually works for us well when our currency is weak, because then people want to buy our goods because they're not that expensive, because we're given the exchange rate. But in our case, if you look at it, our currency, what it does, the yo-yo. In 1998, in 1980, we were exchanging the dollar at something like 7 shillings and 42 cents. Rates at 2018 were at 100. We haven't moved from that particular orbit of 100. We haven't. Now, everything about the Kenyan, the so-called citizen of Kenya, tells you that this is one of the most hardworking individuals you can have come across on this planet. They are resilient, they are hardworking, and they look for opportunities. But apart from the lip service that is paid, all these monies that you see, we are told we keep borrowing. If they went to the budgetary allocations that our ministers for finance tell us on budget day, these situations we keep discussing here, we wouldn't be discussing them, because they most definitely would have changed. To understand this, let me just explain this. You see, if you look at our current debt, which is more than half of our economic output, every Kenyan essentially owes something like $962. That's what every Kenyan owes. Yet, what we produce, is 1,169. So, in essence, you can see that we have entered the danger zone. We are beginning to consume. We get to the point where we're going to be consuming more than we can actually produce. That is not a pleasant position to be in. And we are still borrowing. Remember, it was 2014, the first Euro bond, 2018, the next one, a 4-year span. And these amounts are staggering. They're not small amounts, they're staggering amounts.
The CS for Treasury actually says that we are okay. Our debt is at a sustainable level. We are comfortably meeting our obligations.
It would be sustainable if we were not borrowing to repay.
We are comfortably meeting our obligations.
Yes, we are borrowing to meet the obligations. We shouldn't be.
And in fact, with this new move, so there's this new move. There's a new move to amend the regulations. That's the public finance management regulations. And then the move now says that CT will no longer be telling us about our borrowing in reference to our GDP. It'll be an absolute figure. So we move from that 50% of GDP story. We go into an absolute figure. Now we actually start at 9.1 trillion. So our ceiling for borrowing will be at 9.1 trillion. What are we now? We still have like 4 trillion to borrow.
You know,
that's when we get into dangerous levels.
I've actually avoided having that economic discussion because this is a subject that other people know far better informed than I am. That's not where I'm going with my discussion here.
But what I'm saying is, these experts at the National Treasury are actually saying that we are fine.
These same experts are the same ones telling us that we have a stable economy and it's growing. An economy grows when the number of people who are living below the poverty level reduces. Ours isn't reducing, it is increasing. So how on earth are we developing? How?
Well, we need to borrow to develop. Therein lies the conundrum. There's no country that develops without borrowing. There's a lot of untapped potential in wide areas in the country, which infrastructure could bring to the fore. And, of course, the money that is then generated from this, and with extra investment, maybe from FDI, foreign direct investment, we would then be able to repay the loans. The question is, are these infrastructure projects going to deliver what they promise? They say they promise they will. We've seen with the SGR, we perhaps haven't yet reaped the benefits in as far as an infrastructure project.
Njeri, we won't.
We might do, who knows?
We won't.
Although the government has now been saying that, it wasn't supposed to make a profit, it's a transport service.
We won't.
Transport service, yes. It's supposed basically, over time, we'll be able to have
if it's a transport service, then why is the government forcing transporters or people who want to transport their containers, why are they being forced to use the SDR?
Because we need to pay the 12 billion shillings of maintenance for I think that's the annual fee. Of course it shouldn't. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do.
And I'm telling you that
but how else are we supposed to develop?
Even if all the containers that come into this country go through SGR, it still will not be able to pay that debt as we require it.
Okay.
Even if we do that.
How else are we supposed to develop? You've got to borrow money. The only thing I can say that is different in terms of what's affected our development and this borrowing is previously maybe the will to fight corruption and graft hasn't been as strong as we're now seeing. So maybe now as we borrow this money, we'll actually go to the uses that it's intended to, because we're now fighting graft. It's not like before where money was borrowed and it didn't go into the projects that it was supposed to go into. So there is that element. But we need to borrow. There's no question about that.
No one questions the need for borrowing.
Right.
We keep borrowing, but it doesn't do what it's supposed to do.
Because there had been graft previously, and with the new renewed rigor and vigor and intention to
Perhaps
fight.
also mismanagement.
No, I'm not even going the mismanagement corruption route. Why must we build all these dams? Why don't we just stop developing for a while? Why don't we just say the moratorium, halt?
Hold and then
Before these dams or these plans were in place, we were living. Okay? It's not as though something adverse had happened. Stop. Just put a halt on where we are. Take a deep breath. Let air get into the system.
Regroup.
Yes. And then talk about development. But this vortex that we're being pulled into, where you're borrowing, and then you're borrowing, and then you're borrowing. 36% of our population live below the poverty line. 36.
How do you expect us to lift them out of that?
Precisely.
It's got to be through development.
If we borrow and it isn't doing anything, stop borrowing.
Stop borrowing. I think I think we're
Stop.
handcuffed. I think we're
Stop.
handcuffed. Definitely handcuffed to this whole notion that because we've not borrowed to the ceiling, that we can still keep on because we are still okay, and we cannot continue to do that because we're going to find ourselves in the frog boiling water situation, whereby we don't realize that we're actually being boiled until our skin has fallen off because we are not aware that the temperatures are actually harming us than doing anything else. We borrow because we can. We're not borrowing because we have to. And as a nation, when you look at the lives of the people that you're actually holding to ransom in terms of development by continually borrowing, then we have a big problem. We can see the indicators. And I would say that Kenya is a country where policy is best on paper. And we have all these fantastic projects and we have all these wonderful things that we can put down on paper. In terms of the implementation, we have a problem. And if we have an implementation problem, we should not be taking any more money. We should not be borrowing because we're not able to implement. And we can see historically that has been a problem. Most of the projects we have governors even at county level talking about projects that have not been implemented for one reason or the other, and this also translates on a national level. If we are seeing that playing out, then we should not be taking any more money to fuel these projects. We do not come to the light. They
So,
don't.
City, basically, you're saying, as I hear you, let's freeze.
Let's
We need
look.
to stop and
freeze-
take an audit
freeze
of
new
what is
projects.
going on.
Eric, since
Freeze
2000
new projects,
since
freeze.
2008, our borrowing has gone up by 42.8%. Okay, has our development or our growth grown with any commensuration to that borrowing? No,
If we take
have
an
our
audit-
projects actually, have our national projects increased by that percentage?
no, they haven't.
Do we have a 42% increase in the number
no,
of new
we
projects?
haven't.
No, we
haven't.
don't.
We don't. And the unemployment rate in this country is at 40%. Remember, our labor force is something like 20 million labor force. So if you're talking about 40% of that being unemployed, see, these are not statistics that should be going up. They should be going down. More people should have been employed if the development for which Njeri correctly says the money was intended for actually happened. All right? All these things, the number of people who are poor, living below the poverty line, should have decreased. It isn't happening, and we're borrowing. So why are we borrowing? Stop borrowing.
So stop borrowing.
Just stop.
Also stop what you're saying earlier. Stop the projects. as
Yes,
well.
stop. Just stop.
If you take a halt on the projects,
Stop.
if you say like all the projects that haven't commenced and they were earmarked for,
Stop.
don't
Stop.
commence. The ones that are not complete and they're actually not moving,
Stop.
take a pause. So that's what you're saying. If we
Stop.
do, for how long? How long do you want to give us the
Just
moratorium
take
for?
a year and look at what happens.
A year to regroup.
Yes, if our budget for the year is the amount that we say, take a year and just simply collect what you can. The KRA is constantly telling us that they fall behind in their collection. It means there's money, but they're not collecting it.
I don't think we have to stop. I don't think we have a choice but to stop. We're now being refused loans. If you remember, a certain phase of the SGR was reliant on more money from the Chinese, which didn't come through. I think what's important as well is the government is a little bit more transparent in some of the negotiations that we see happening internationally. We get news and tweets from State House and so on saying bilateral agreements. We don't know what's in these agreements. What are we tying ourselves to? Hence, we don't know what collateral we could be giving away. And those talk of even the airport going, of course, those were rumors at the time, but we just don't know. So a little bit more transparency from the government. And then, of course, also, when we do borrow money, there needs to be a lot more transparency there in terms of the actual projects that the money is going to, so that the debt is earmarked for certain specific capital projects, not just general, which is what we've seen or we saw with the Eurobond, and there was a lot of sort of noise around it. And the quote coming from the government there just said it was applied towards the government's development initiatives and liability management. Now, that's too broad and vague. So if the citizenry was more informed, if the government was more transparent, then maybe we would put pressure on the government to do the right thing, which is what governance and democracy and how, that's how it works. It's not about these tribal blocks that I talk about every Monday. It's about us understanding what the government is doing with our economy and deciding, is this the route we want to go, and then an opposition providing an alternative for that, and us then deciding at the ballot box which way we want to go. But of course we don't have these discussions.
There's mortgaging our heritage in terms of our ports or our airports, and then there's mortgaging your citizenry. This is where we are at, actually, and this is what even I find completely worrying. You see, the very thing that the borrowing is supposed to do, it doesn't do. Continuously, religiously, it doesn't do. So if it doesn't, all we achieve is more debt.
This latest spate of borrowing that we want to enter into now, is it clear what it is for? I think we need to.
They state it.
What has been stated?
The government doesn't lack the explaining it, saying it. Treasury is full of economists, the people who understand these things. Look, justifying something on paper and it actually working are not the same thing. How many times do you think the IMF and World Bank have told us this economy is going to collapse completely? Why? Because they have some arithmetic, there's some matrices they use for working this thing out. And they don't take into account what we call the hidden economy, the Juakali sector, for instance. Which, when you look at any literature that talks about the economy of Kenya and the things it does, one of the first things it talks about is the informal sector. Number one, not 2, 3, number 1 or 2. Meaning, it's been recognized as an engine, something that actually moves this country. Now, you tell me, from what we know, anecdotally speaking, how much money goes into that sector to actually improve it? And if it did, visibly, you would see the changes. How much money do you see going into it?
Well, it's clear that there's no direct from the government in terms of, buffering that particular part of the economy, that section of the economy. Any help or any kind of bolstering that it has received is coming from outside individuals or corporations who want to come in and say, look, we want to help. And we want to, we had just recently the MasterCard Foundation coming into Kenya, and that was one of their, indicator. They said, look, the Juakali sector, the informal sector is where we want to put our eye in terms of now increasing employment in the country and actually bolstering the sector as a whole. But in terms of the government saying that we are going to do this and this is a pet project of ours, we've not seen that happen. We've not seen direct, participation from the government in that particular sector. It just seems to be something that it's in existence. We just want to see how it will carry on.
You see, for purpose of discussion, look at the government borrowing again from internal sources, domestic borrowing. What it does, it ensures and it guarantees that you will not get money from a bank if you wish to borrow. Because the government is a safer borrower, and they pay a premium. You don't have a problem with them paying. So, the very so-called citizenry who depends on such loans to supposedly develop and to play their part in growing the economy is again hampered. So, this borrowing is not something that should be taken lightly.
No, it has many effects, of course, but I want to go back to the informal sector before we move we move away from that, because that is actually one way to get out of this debt. It's a way, if we can enhance revenue collection within that industry, within that sector, we'd be able to make money to start repaying these loans and stop relying so much on the idea of waiting for these infrastructure projects to materialize, because that might take some time. And it's important that the government realizes this. There's two ways out of this. Well, it's multi-pronged. Firstly, cutting on spending, which is a tall order for government here in Kenya. But that's the first thing. It has to do reduce government spending, but very importantly, enhance revenue collection. This is in the short term. And when we talk about the informal economy, it's been very difficult to collect money from them. So what tends to happen, it's passed on as a consumption tax. So, it's in petrol and so on, which of course affects everybody, and you can get backlash from the general public. So the government avoids that as well. So let's look for a way to start taxing. I know this sounds terrible, but to include them or to bring them into the fold when it comes to revenue collection. And there would be advantages to them as well in terms of being able to get loans and things, and formalizing that sector, so to speak. But also very importantly, we've got to start looking for other ways to make money for the country other than through development or through infrastructure. Yes, infrastructure needs to be there, but for instance, the fact that we export raw materials, the idea of value addition could go a long way in bringing revenue into the country. That is crucial. That's something else we haven't been focusing on. It should be directed, or the government should be thinking about doing these things. So there's factors, or there's ways in which we could mitigate the impact of these loans. There's no doubt about that. And we also need to focus on them. Instead of just complaining about the loans, we can say, actually, let's enhance our revenue collection. Let's actually cut on government spending. But we do need the loans in order to develop. There's no country that has reached, or, every country needs to build infrastructure. How are we going to do this? It's got to be through loans.
I want to ask this, and then I'll give the phone lines. Why do you think the government has actually been unable to do that, to expand the tax bracket? And two, now we have manufacturing as one of the big four. And manufacturing, that's where the value addition would come in, and that's where we'd be able to also increase our own internal revenues. Why is it that it's been so hard, especially for widening of the tax bracket?
I think
yes,
there's been I think there's been general unwillingness to do this. If I remember clearly, about 15 years ago, the current governor of Kisumu, Anyang' Nyong'o, kept insisting for a country with an economy like this to widen the tax bracket. And he insisted on this several times, and it could have been in only word, but indeed it actually did not come out. But on several occasions in the position in which he was in, he kept saying, this is the way for us to go. 15 years ago, he said this.
When he was Minister for Planning.
When he was Minister for Planning, exactly. And if we look at a chicken and egg situation, this comes first in order for us to achieve what it is that we want to achieve. I dare say that if he had been listened to at that point, with the individuals that surrounded him also who believed in this thing, it makes sense. And we've seen that done in other places, in other countries, in other nations where it has worked. If you widen the tax bracket and you formalize sectors where you're not really paying attention to right now, what you inevitably get is that you have obviously formalization of other sectors, but then you have other sectors who are also contributing nationally, and so within, then you're able to create more income, and that income then is expendable in areas like paying off of debt. Because yes, we've already established that a growing economy requires debt in order for it to develop. Rather, it requires loans in order for it to develop, which of course, translates to debt. However, there's some healthy kind of debt that you should have as an emerging or a continuing economy. However, you can't continue to tax the same sector over and over and over again and hope that you will get that kind of income coming in. It just does not happen. And so you need to widen it in order to bring in other sectors so that you can also increase your income, so that you're looking internally for other sources of funding. And it sounds so simple, but I think we have to get to that point where we say we need to then embrace the simplicity of it. It is that simple. We can actually do it.
What we're discussing here isn't some fairy tale that
it's not
some mythical land that we will never get
unicorns
to.
And
no. These are things that have actually happened in this country.
Unfortunately, it's not been sustained.
During the Kibaki government. some of these things we're talking about actually were achieved actually.
Revenue collection was boosted.
Yes.
There was enhancement of KRA as
Yes.
an authority. You know,
Yes.
Initially, it used to be a customs body. Now
Yes.
Used to be. And here we are
it
speaking
became
about what used
a
to be.
revenue authority. So
Yes.
the revenue authority had more power and more
Yes.
more space to actually
Yes.
collect more. And then it stopped.
Yes.
We're
it's
talking about
after
something that used
Kibaki
to
left.
be. Exactly.
Remember, we even had a situation where the Kenya Revenue Authority didn't only meet its target.
It's a past.
It's a past.
So then what we see then is clearly we're not looking at something that is systemic. We're looking at something that is individualistic.
Our people have, this government has an appetite for borrowing. It's a worrying appetite. There is enough money within the country to do a lot of what we want to do if it is collected. The government itself keeps reporting and telling us that they don't meet the targets. These targets are not set out of wishful thinking. No. It's scientific. They know exactly what they're targeting, but they don't collect them.
Let me give the phone line. 0719-012-600. That's 0719-012-600. Would love for you to chime into this conversation. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. CT Muga is actually raising the issue of our borrowing and our debt, our public debt. And among the things that we are talking about this morning is, wait a minute. So what exactly are we doing? Are we mortgaging ourselves as a people? Are we being mortgaged as a people? Is our debt actually also being used as collateral? Number one. Number two, how do we improve our tax collection? Number three, how do we even stop this borrowing, or how do we reduce our borrowing? And well, we are borrowing for projects and we're not seeing those projects. Maybe we should actually take a moratorium, a 1-year break, and say, let's review what we have on the ground. Let's see what's important. Let's complete what can actually be completed, and others we shelve them, and then we move on from there, because we're borrowing for projects that we are not necessarily seeing. So we've got an irrigation project that has been launched that, of course,
Fell to the ground.
that, of course, means that we're going to borrow for it. We've got dams that we've borrowed for. We've got water catchment projects that we've borrowed for. Every project that you're seeing in the country has been borrowed for. How many have come into completion? Not as many.
I think in terms of debt and what CT is alluding to, collateral, of course, it then comes down to our ability or inability to repay. That's the question. And it's important that I highlight at this stage that we're having a much easier time paying debt these days. There was a time that at the height of our public debt craze, over 30% of our national budget was spent paying back interest alone, whereas in 2017 to 2018 we only spent between 8 to 10% of our national government budget on interest payments. So we've been in a worse off position in terms of repayments, not in terms of the actual amount, but in terms of repayment and as a percentage of our budget. If you look back to a while back, we were spending 30% of our budget on interest payments. That's interest alone, repayments. Whereas now we're spending about 10% of our national budget on interest. So our ability to pay seems to be growing. So that's what's important when it comes to taking out these loans. So it doesn't matter how much we're taking out. We've taken out, although the World Bank, or is it the IMF, it does recommend that we don't go above the 40%. We're now at 56% in terms of the debt to GDP ratio. But you have countries that are past 100%, places like Japan. Of course, there's no question about their ability to pay it back. But what I'm saying, in terms of our ability to repay these loans, we've been in a position where we're worse off. The idea of using 30% of the government's budget to pay back just interest, we've been there and we managed. Right now, we're only using 10% to pay back the interest. So maybe it's something we can handle.
Let's talk about our national debt. Our telephone lines, 0719-012-600. That's 0719-012-600. Opening up the phone lines in the next hour for you to contribute on this. Also, you can contribute on our Facebook page where we are live streaming. That's Spice FM KE. That's Facebook, Spice FM KE. We are also live streaming on YouTube on Spice FM KE. And also, you can